Esports has ruined gaming. Okay, let's see what this guy has to say about it. Y'all think esports ruined gaming? I don't know about that. Here we go.
Imagine this for a second. An arena full of excited fans waiting to watch their favourite video game. But this hyper-competitive, high-octane electronic sport these guys are playing isn't doing too hot right now. It's been dominated by one incredibly powerful strategy, and the game devolves into long and boring matches with no variation.
You mean like, fucking WoW? Yeah.
Commentators, passionate and desperate to keep the game alive, are trying to find any...
Remember that one Blizzard fucking arena week? And the broadcast lasted for 11 hours? 11 hours straight. Because every game went into dampening at 80%. It was absolutely fucking brutal.
Of excitement that they can, but they know that it's a futile effort. As the tournament goes on, people start to leave the arena, sponsors lose faith in the game, and eventually the developer's baby and work of passion has been forced to shut down. This scenario is a game developer's absolute worst nightmare, especially in an era where the expectation is that every new multiplayer game release eventually turns into a hyper-competitive esport.
I don't think that games need to be an esport. I really don't think so. I think you're always going to have, like, competitions and tournaments and stuff. But, like, for example, like, every Battle Royale tournament is, like, you can make it an esport, but it's never going to be as... It's never going to have the level of fairness that, like, CSGO has in terms of an esport. Because, like, everybody's dropping and, like, everybody's playing at least a little bit on a different playing field. So... I think there's a lot of games that are very popular that don't have esports to them, but I do think that games trying to position themselves to be esports games can sometimes do so at the expense of the player. And this is one of the things that happens. Like, I think if he's going to talk about Overwatch, it's a really good example, because Overwatch has, like, some heroes that are, like, really, really good at high ranks, like Widowmaker, and they also have other characters that are really, really good at low ranks, like Winston is kind of good. I'm trying to think of, like, a character that's, like, super... what's a really good... Moira? Yeah, Moira. Yeah, Moira or Bastion or Torbjorn, something like that. And, like, these characters absolutely are a terror in bronze and silver, but you never really see them played as much whenever it's higher ranks, and so it makes it hard to balance the game around them.
I feel like that expectation has clouded the judgment of not just a wide part of the gaming community, but even the developers of these games themselves. And I can't help but feel like both sides are just missing the point. Just because a game comes out with a multiplayer mode in it doesn't mean it has what it takes to be a competitive game. Otherwise, we'd be seeing $1 million Mario Kart tournaments crop up everywhere.
Yeah.
So what sets Mario Kart apart from, say, League of Legends or...
I'll tell you what sets it apart. It's owned by Nintendo, and Nintendo are absolute motherfuckers whenever it comes to letting people use their IP. That's the real reason why you don't have big Mario Kart tournaments, okay? It's got nothing to do with anything else.
Street Fighter. And what makes a good esport? Well, to answer that question, I'll go through the reasons people seem to think are true, but really aren't. There's a common notion that rampant dev support is needed for a game to be successful in a tournament setting. That without millions of dollars from the developers and Coca-Cola sponsorships at every event, then your game is just going to die. In reality though, all the developer support...
I think obviously Smash Melee just immediately deletes that argument.
Really do is artificially make the game seem like it's alive, when it very likely would be abandoned if there wasn't any monetary incentive to play.
I might start playing Valorant.
Games like Fortnite had to learn this the hard way, because although the Fortnite World Cup had the biggest prize pool in esports history and a massive arena full of rabid children, it still couldn't escape the fact that the game itself doesn't make for a good viewing experience, because all you see is a battle of who gets the luckiest with their weapon drops and which player can build a tower the fastest instead of actually shooting the other guy. All you have to do to disprove this...
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Like, it is fun as a visual spectacle to watch the last circle in a Fortnite competitive game, but it's not a fun esport to watch in general.
look at the numerous examples where games have had large and passionate communities with little to no dev support, such as the Smash community and pretty much the entire early FGC. These games were, or still are, alive and kicking with only the passion of a few players.
FGC is fighting game community, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, makes sense, sure.
Players and grassroots crowdfunding efforts to keep tournaments running. Smash especially shows this fully, considering Nintendo has tried to kill its competitors in every way imaginable since its inception. Some people are going to say that fighting game tournaments have had full developer support and big sponsorships for about a decade now, so I can't use them as an example because they're using the same things to
sponsor. See, like, I think that some people might have a distorted view on how sponsors come into events. So sponsors come into events if events are popular. So for example, if an event is going to get a lot of viewers, then somebody's going to want to sponsor it. Like, let's say you're BMW, okay? And you're not really familiar with the gaming space. You don't do a lot of advertising in gaming, but you hear that there's like a Fortnite tournament and it's going to have a concurrent viewership of 1 million viewers, let's say. Well, you're going to be much more likely to want to sponsor that than if somebody tells you they're doing a classic Wrath of the Lich King arena tournament for 2v2 and they might peak at 3,000 viewers. That's just the truth, right? Even though probably everybody there is old enough to buy a BMW that watches that game. The fact is, though, that a lot of people are just simply not going to want to sponsor it because it doesn't have any viewers. Sponsors are synonymous with community support, basically. And if there are a lot of people that are watching a sport, then there's going to be a lot of people that want to sponsor the sport because that means that their sponsorship is going to be seen by more people. It's just what makes sense.
Grow themselves that I say don't grow esports. And although that is true, the devs wouldn't have done much to grow the FGC in the first place if it hadn't had that backbone of passionate grassroots support from the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, of course.
Dev support simply can't prop up a bad esport. And similarly,
no, they've tried.
Metric shit tons of content to a game through patches isn't going to do that either.
I think Overwatch is probably the biggest example of a ham-fisted esport. I still don't understand how anybody thought it was a good idea to have a different Overwatch teams associated with real-world cities. That's just the most ridiculous thing. It doesn't even make any sense in the context of the sport. It's so weird. It's just like this was thought up by somebody who has never played video games before. It's like, you know, they came straight from ESPN. They don't really know what competitive gaming. They type it with like an E and then a dash and a sports or some other weird fucking spelling. It's just so weird, man. And I don't like how Overwatch League is with that. And I also think that a lot of people are losing interest in these like massive leagues of these games, like minus like a handful of them like Dota, etc. Like, for example, today, I think 100 Thieves, it came out that 100 Thieves was laying off 100 people. Straight up. So, and it was like 15 or 17% of their, of the people that they had employed. And, or is it 30 people? Oh, it might have been, maybe, let's say it's 30 people. They're laying off a lot of people. And you guys have seen this a lot probably recently, if you keep up with this at all, is that tons of these esports orgs are dropping people like crazy. Because the truth is that esports doesn't have a return on the same level that I think sponsors and people expect it to. I think a lot of people over-invested into esports thinking that it was going to be this massive thing, but it really hasn't been.
Frequent battle passes, skins, new maps, weapons and characters are a common thing to see in modern games, and they admittedly can be a great way to keep adding to a great base game, refining the experience to its absolute best. But they are only at their most effective if there aren't any other glaring issues outside of the game's content. It doesn't matter how many skins and characters Multiverses adds, it's not going to fix the server connectivity issues and the lack of modes other than online versus. And
you cannot have a successful esports game if the base game is not good. If the base game is bad for the average player, nobody is going to watch the esport because nobody's going to care about the game.
See the results of that in its dramatic drop in players since release. If you want a modern game for an example, take CSGO, a game that has had periods of years go by with little to no significant additions to content, at least until Valorant came out. And it is still one of the biggest and most beloved esports of all time.
I think another big reason Counter-Strike has that, they have legacy appeal because so many people have grown up playing Counter-Strike. And also my dad, who has never played Counter-Strike except for whenever he was in Vietnam, he can watch this game and know what's going on. Counter-Strike and Rocket League are the S-tier esports for somebody who is not an avid video game player to get into.
Having too little content makes a game feel shallow and unfinished, sure, but adding too much content can make a game feel bloated or even negatively impact the game experience if the new map or weapon favors a degenerate strategy. Smash 4 was a perfectly fine game that received constant updates including new stages and characters, and these characters added a lot to the game. However, the final DLC character, Bayonetta, ended up ruining the game so badly that Nintendo shipped out an emergency last-minute patch to fix her, which didn't end up doing much, so after they abandoned the game, it turned into such a toxic experience that two 15-year-olds decided to have a standoff in EVO Grand Finals.
Bro, what is going on? What is this? I don't know, I was stalling for time.
And I know what you're thinking. Ardrid, if there's something degen in a game, they should just nerf it. And I fully agree.
Yeah.
But let's focus on that point a little more. Because all of these big companies...
I actually think this is not something that has to do with esports. And the way that I can prove that is World of Warcraft. Like, World of Warcraft doesn't really have a strong esports community. Most people in WoW do not care about the esports. If they did, the most popular players for the game would not... You know, they would be the people that are winning the tournaments, and they're not. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody watches the tournaments. Nobody cares. It's unfortunate. I wish that was not the case, but it is. The truth is that you're wrong on that. No, I'm not. I know it better than anybody. So the truth is that the reason why esports are... The reason why this is happening is not because of esports. It's because of metagaming. Like, if you go and you play Elden Ring, here's another great example. If you played Elden Ring on release, how many people are using Moonveil and Rivers of Blood? Everybody. Was it an esport? No. It's just metagaming. Every single game now gets metagamed like fucking crazy. It has that part of it has nothing to do with esports.
Sponsorships and content-altering patches pale in comparison to the most important thing that everyone says a good esport must have. The elusive and ever-desired concept of balance. It's the idea that as many options in the game should be viable at the highest levels of play, and through that, the metagame will be healthy and intriguing for the players, and a fascinating experience to watch for viewers at home. Balancing a game is always tough, and there's a ton of different philosophies you can use to accomplish it. But the one that has propped up over the last few years is the idea of perfect balance. That everything should be as equal as possible for a game to be...
I don't think that's what's been happening recently. I think that the way that esports games get balanced now is they are balanced very frequently and rebalanced very frequently, so the meta changes constantly and people have to continue adapting. And that way, there is imbalances, but the imbalances change so often that all you have to do is ride the wave. So I don't think that we really have... I think the only game that you can probably make an argument for perfect balance with might be StarCraft. Where, like, StarCraft, they probably don't make that many changes to it, and they try to actually have, like, that perfect balance.
Any fun competitively. But again, if you look at the history, you'll see way too many examples of beloved games that have had varying levels of balance. Smash Bros. Melee, Tekken Tag Tournament 1, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. All of these games are considered to be some of the greatest competitive games in their genre, yet have completely unbalanced rosters where only a small fraction of the characters available to you are viable in tournament play. Okay, at this point, some of you might be thinking something like, this guy is such a dumbass. He's making it seem like none of these things matter with anecdotal examples of games that came out 20 years ago that didn't have any of those things. These games didn't have the same standards or lofty expectations that we have now.
I think that it's much more true that the reason why Smash Brothers Melee has a massive community is because it was a foundational game that almost everybody who is between the ages of 18 to 35 understands. So a lot of people are going to be able to watch Smash Brothers. They've played the game a lot. So I think that's a big reason why it's super popular. It's the same reason why almost every other esport game is popular. With these other games, I'm not really too sure about them. And another reason why you don't see Smash Brothers having, like, getting ruined, I guess you could say, by, like, these, like, meta games and these imbalances is because there's not a very high standard of online play. Like, the games that really devolve are the games that are very, very ingrained into online play, where you play against other people constantly, like battle royales and stuff like that, CS:GO.
Nor do they have the same level of options that we do now.
Yeah.
Players at the time probably just stuck with their game despite being unbalanced or bloated or whatever, right? Wrong. Wait. No! Allow me to disprove that statement with another anecdotal example. The player-based transition from Tekken Tag Tournament 1 to Tekken 4, or the attempted transition, I should say. Let's set the scene.
Okay.
Tekken Tag 1 was considered to be the absolute gold standard of the Tekken series. The pro players loved it, and in just a little over a year, they would be able to play the game's eagerly anticipated sequel, Tekken 4. They waited until the game's release month in the arcades of July 2001, and when they got their hands on it, they hated it. It was slow and weird, and the stages had walls and stuff now, although in hindsight they were really cool. And to make matters worse, it had an equally as unbalanced roster as Tag 1, with new character Steve and especially returning fighter Jin being incredibly oppressive. Tekken 4 matches quickly devolved into Jin versus Jin matches, and the game was as divisive as it could have possibly been. Based on this guy's assumption earlier, you'd think that these players would stick with Tekken 4 as this was 2001 and there weren't as many options or as high expectations as we have now for games.
That's kind of what happened with Brawl. Is I remember when, like, Super Smash Bros. Brawl came out for the Wii, people didn't like it as much as Melee. There were a lot of people that played it, but there were also a lot of people that just went back to Melee. And I think that was really because the gameplay. It had nothing really to do with the balance or lack thereof balance. It was the gameplay wasn't as good.
Well, actually, the exact opposite happened. After a while of trying to make Tekken 4 work, many Tekken players simply either went back to the horribly unbalanced Tekken Tag 1 or transitioned to other fighting games. Many decided to switch to Namco's other 3D fighter series that had just released a new entry, Soul Calibur 2.
I had that game. I fucking love this game. This game was so fucking good, man. And yeah, I mean, that was a... Like, I think Melee and Brawl is a really good example of this too, because remember they made Project M, I think that's what it was called, where they took Brawl and then they made it faster and they made it play like Melee. And then I believe it got shut down by Nintendo or something.
Game where the entire roster seemed to be insanely cheap.
Yep.
So why did they go back to a game where the entire roster seemed to be insane?
I used to play these two guys, Nightmare and Astaroth. Those are my favorite. This guy was a fucking BDSM simp, and I remember she was really hot.
Cheap. So why did they go back? Aren't Tekken Tag
yeah.
1 and Soul Calibur 2 just as bad as Tekken 4 when it comes to cheap characters and strategies? What was the difference between these games that made people hate Tekken 4 so much yet adore Tag 1 and Soul Calibur 2? Well,
Combat
to answer
sucked.
that question,
Yeah.
I think it's finally time to get into the actual things that I think create a great and successful esport. 1. The game needs to be easy to understand and watch. It doesn't
So that's the problem with WoW.
necessarily have to be fast-paced, but what it does have to be is something that even someone who has never even seen the game before can look at and understand it just from a glance.
Yeah, anybody can understand. Yeah, he's showing the two best examples, of course. CSGO and Rocket League. 100%. Those are the S-tier spectator sport esports.
Objectives, important elements such as health and damage, and even strategies need to be as easy to understand as possible. As an easy to understand game is going to have a much simpler time bringing in new players than a visual clusterfuck like Fortnite's pro scene. Overwatch has consistently run into this problem with its esports circuit too.
Nobody understands what the fuck is going on in Overwatch except people that play it a lot. I think that there are characters that it's easier to understand what they're doing. Like, for example, Mercy, it's easy to understand how Mercy plays, Widowmaker, Soldier 76, a handful of other ones. But, like, with, like, Reinhardt, for example, or, like, I guess you can understand Roadhog because he gets the hooks. But I would say like Reinhardt is probably an example of a character. It's like really kind of hard to understand if it's good or not. Zenyatta, probably hard to understand what's going on. Sombra, yeah, very much so with Sombra. And there's probably a handful of other ones. And like Symmetra, if you've never played Overwatch before and you watch somebody play Symmetra, you're not really going to understand what the fuck is going on.
But there are just so many particle effects and stuff happening on screen with no downtime whatsoever that it's overwhelming for people who don't understand the game inside and out. 2. A competent and passionate community and tournament organisers. I'm not talking about some random bog standard event organizer. I'm talking about someone from the community of...
I think that's a like a passionate community creates tournaments. Because a lot of people, like, think about it like Ludwig, for example. Like, Ludwig has done a number of different tournaments now. And why is that? He's done tournaments for games that are very popular and that do very well. We do the exact same thing. And I think that's what makes sense. It's common sense to do that. So the tournament organizers will come if the audience is there.
Their game that's passionate and hardworking. Usually someone who was a diehard player themselves who transitioned into TOing. Esports, for the most part, is not a very profitable industry. So to put on the greatest events on a frequent
That's why
basis,
all these esports orgs are laying people off.
willing to lose money on running tournaments simply for the love of the game. It's what built the early days of Counter-Strike, the FGC, and pretty much every esport that stood the test of time today. If your game's competitive scene can't at some point sustain itself on passion alone, then it has little hope of succeeding in a wider context.
Yeah, I think that actually esports is going to run into a very big lull. It's going to run into a very big, like almost a recession, you could say, because I see how much these franchise slots are to get into these different like massive leagues. And I just can't imagine how anybody turns a profit with that. Like, how do you turn a profit whenever it's a $10 million, $20 million entry fee? I don't think it happens, man. I really don't. And that's why you see people that are dropping esports teams, people that are losing esports teams. And what you are seeing, however, and this is something very interesting, and the person who invented this, I think the first person who really did, well, actually, I'd never even thought of this. Sodapoppin did this first. Because remember back whenever Sodapoppin was an owner of NRG, and then he would watch his team play, and it was very popular. It was like, it really boosted the sport. It boosted him as well. It was just a completely massive symbiotic relationship. Now you have Moist Critical doing the exact same thing with Moist Esports. And he does that with Smash, with Rocket League, and I think now they have a third team as well. So he's effectively using that team as content. And I saw Myth was actually making a team for Valorant, and he's going to do the exact same thing. And that way, a content creator can monetize that content in a way that I think many other people are not able to do, and these esports organizations are not able to do because of the amount of overhead they have. So we're seeing a bit of a change, and I don't think this is necessarily a good thing for the players, because being contracted by like just an individual streamer is just like being one of their teams is probably much more volatile. But I do think it's interesting how things have evolved.
And 3, this one is the most important
Disguised
one.
Toast Valorant.
The game's
yeah, there you go.
mechanics need to be as perfectly balanced as possible. Some of you are going to say that I'm contradicting myself here, as I literally just said that balance wasn't important. But let's make a key distinction here. All of the examples I showed of unbalanced games gaining esports success were unbalanced in their rosters, their weapons, their specific elements in which you interact with the game mechanics. The reason that people preferred Tekken Tag 1 to Tekken 4, despite both games having horribly unbalanced rosters, was because Tekken Tag 1's core game mechanics were simply much more balanced than Tekken 4's. Even if Steve and Jin were nerfed into oblivion in Tekken 4, the game would have died anyway because of its broken wall system and stupidly easy jab pressure out of one-frame sidewalks. It wouldn't matter if Bayonetta was never added into Smash 4, because the game's over-reliance on shielding as an approach option and the strength of grabs would have eventually killed it anyway. And
yeah, that's probably true.
No matter how many balance patches and new heroes they added to Overwatch 1, it didn't stop the massive amount of stuns and the 2-tank meta from scaring people away. And after those things were fixed in Overwatch 2, you can easily see just how much larger and passionate the community has gotten over that game. Unless it's an extreme case, when a character or weapon is overpowered, there are always going to be players who will avoid them by using different characters or weapons.
Yeah, I think the best example of that is Jigglypuff in Super Smash Bros. Melee. Like, I never thought that Jigglypuff was a good character back in, like, 2004. I thought Jigglypuff was just a shit character. I don't know why anybody's playing it. And now it's, like, one of the top-tier characters. And you see people even using Falco now. And it's... I think that Super Smash Bros. Melee is probably the most interesting meta because of how many different characters are valid and useful inside of the way that people are currently playing. That, to me, is so fucking cool.
Heroes are a thing in every game, but when the core gameplay mechanics heavily favor a particular strat or playstyle,
yeah, the gameplay mechanics are good.
Avoid the mechanics?
I think this is a problem with WoW Arena too. It's like so much of WoW Arena is built around the mechanics are you go, then you use your defensive cooldowns on their go, and then you wait for your go, and then they use their defensive cooldowns on their go. And then in between those times, you're running away from each other. Running away and line of sighting is just simply not... It's a useful strategy because it works, but it's just not something that's fun to watch.
Mechanics is basically the same thing as not playing the game at all. So from that perspective, it's obvious just how important a balanced core gameplay loop is.
Yeah, basically, if the metagame is bad, then it's a bad game. Like with Smash Brothers, the metagame is good and it's unbalanced, but it's a good metagame. But if you have a bad metagame, then yeah, it's dead.
Sense, the metrics for what make a good esport are very similar to what makes a good game in general. Nobody wants to play a platform where running and jumping are slow after all. But the problem is, in the pursuit of this esports dream and eternal relevancy, a lot of developers seem to lose sight of that fact. Think about the biggest live service games in the world right now.
Okay.
League of Legends, Valorant, Apex Legends. All of these games seem to be in good states now, but where will they be in 20 years? Will they even be around in 20 years?
I think that Valorant will probably be around. I don't know about League. I don't think, though, I feel like making a 20-year projection, if you asked people, I think 20 years ago, if Counter-Strike would be around in 20 years, I'm pretty sure you'd have a lot of people that would probably say no to that as well. Because you can't predict what's happening. Like, you know, technology, especially nowadays, is just so rapidly changing. And especially with like the advent of like these like AI things, with the amount of like fucking like VR shit that people have, what do we even know? What is video gaming going to be in 20 years? Everybody has a different guess, but I think that there will be people that end up guessing right. But I think it's just, you know, pick a number between 1 and 10, you've got a 10% chance of getting it. Doesn't mean that you're fucking psychic. I don't think anybody really knows.
If their level of success stays the same, then probably, but I guarantee you the obsession that these games' devs have with constant content updates and frequent balance patches will mean that the Apex of today will look nothing like the Apex of 2042.
And it shouldn't.
And what if these changes actually made the game worse rather than better? What will you do then? Play an older version of the game? This isn't Minecraft version swapping. These games require you to be online in order to play them. So it's ride or die with the current...
That's what's happened with WoW, and that's why they made Classic WoW. So I think that they probably would do that. I'm sure, and I think this happened. Didn't Fortnite do like a throwback season with like all the old weapons and the old map and stuff like that? I think they did, but I don't remember. And they also did the no build. So yeah, I mean, it's not like this is unprecedented.
Version until the devs fix it. And if the game servers get shut down, then tough luck. You are never playing this game again. When talking about game preservation, everyone mentions the old classics that require aging hardware to run. But what about the hundreds of live service games that require massive servers to run and have had so many content patches that the version of the game you played as a kid may not even be available anymore? I don't think that esports itself has ruined gaming. Far from it. I love esports myself, but the mentality and glorification of esports that it puts the community and devs into definitely has. It isn't because...
I think it's more metagaming. I think it's metagaming as a whole, and esports leads metagaming. But even in games that don't have an esports scene, metagaming is extremely prevalent. And I think Elden Ring is the best example of that.
Ranked has caused tryhards to pop up everywhere, and I can't 360 no-scope noobs anymore like back in the good old Modern Warfare 2 days, but because game devs all over the world look at the prestige and deep competitive history of games like League of Legends and Street Fighter, and they...
I think also the reason is because a lot of the executives in these companies want to have the next Call of Duty. They want to have the next, like, big video game league, but they don't understand how something like that manifests because they don't really understand what they're doing. So they push a game in a direction that it shouldn't really be going in, or they over push it in a direction and they make the game worse in the process, like Overwatch.
Lust for it so hard that they failed to see the mountain that they had to climb to reach that peak. And the true reasons why people play those games is that they are amazing, mechanically well-balanced experiences that allow for deep and engrossing gameplay. It's not million-dollar prize pools and frequent content updates. And the furious chase of this ideal is simply not smart for most games that aren't really made for esports. A competitive scene has to be gradually built by die-hard fans out of true passion for the game. And just like how you can lead a horse to water and you can't make it drink, you simply can't force a game to be an esport.
No, a game has to be popular for it to be an esport. I think WoW is the best example of that. WoW is pretty much completely dead as a competitive game. And the only part of WoW that isn't dead as a competitive game is the only part of WoW as a competitive game that's not controlled by Blizzard, which is the race to world first.
As long as the gaming community keeps trying to do that, more and more games will fail to reach their true potential.
I think that's true. I definitely do. And I think that designing a game around appealing and being balanced for high-end players is a good way to lose all of your low-end players. And if you lose all of your low-end players, then you lose all of your high-end players too, because nobody's going to watch them play. It's like, imagine if you're a 19-year-old kid and you want to get into playing esports, you want to get into gaming. Think about, like, what are the games that you want to get into and you want to play? Fucking CSGO, Valorant, League, Dota, Rocket League, Smash, Call of Duty. Like, those would be probably the big 7 games I can think of right now. You're not going to go and try, Fortnite, something like that. Apex, maybe. You're not going to go and try to be a competitive World of Warcraft player. Why? Because the ceiling is at the floor. Nobody cares. So if you don't have an esport that has a active, enthusiastic, excited audience, your game is dead. That's what I think happens. Yeah, your game is absolutely fucking dead. Literally, a fighting game would be a better choice than WoW. Yeah, exactly. About Logan, it's a 6-minute video. Yeah, maybe I can watch that. But I think this is a pretty good video. I wish more people talked about this, about, like, games having this problem. See a guy AI chatbot to make a game. It's nuts. You should watch it. Yeah, I'll probably watch that at some point. I don't know if I'm going to look at it today, though. What do you think led the decline of the Overwatch League? The reason why there's a decline of the Overwatch League is because the game simply lost players. And the reason why it lost players is that I think that Overwatch is actually doing something very smart by having a PvE mode. Because there's a lot of people that love the Overwatch characters and they love the world of Overwatch, but they don't like playing the game because it's super tilting. And also the meta was boring. Like, the meta became very formulaic, and this is my understanding of Overwatch 1. I stopped watching it because it was fucking boring, but at the end, my understanding was that it would be everybody uses their ults at the same time, and then everybody waits to use all of their ults on the other team at the same time. I mean, that's what the problem is. I think Overwatch 2 solved that problem to an extent, but there's still people that aren't happy with it. I don't think that's ever going to change. Every game's tilting if you're losing. The problem is that in Overwatch, there's like a force multiplier. Like, for example, if you're playing with a really good Mercy, you will enjoy the game more than if you're playing with like an average, like whenever you're playing with a bad player. It's not just losing, it's also not being able to play the way that your class is designed to play. Because it's like, imagine every Overwatch character is like a card. and you're building a house of cards. You don't build a house of cards by just having one card because it'll fall down one way or another. It needs to be against another card, and there's another card next to that card. So they usually balance each other out in different ways, and they like fully empower each other to be as good as they possibly can be whenever they're playing together, which is one of the best things about the game. But conversely, it's also one of the worst things about the game whenever you have a situation where you're playing with people that don't know what the fuck they're doing, or your team doesn't have a lot of synergy and nobody wants to swap. So that's why. Your experience is made worse by others, much more so in Overwatch than other games. So explain why people watch those speedruns of old N64 games. Literally no one watches that stuff. There's no point. I don't think a lot of people watch those speedruns. I think they're popular, and the reason why those games are popular, by the way, I think is because they're nostalgia games. They're massive nostalgia games, number one. Number two, they're not esports. Like, people caring about speedrunning, like, I mean, how much money is in speedrunning? Probably not a lot. Unless it's maybe like one of the top 3 games. Because all games are bad. Even managed to destroy Age of Empires 2. What games are good? I think that it's not about whether a game is good or bad. It's about how the game evolves and how that game is managed. Much more so than the current state of the game. It's like where the game is going, where the game isn't going. That kind of stuff.